This is Doug DeMuro, and today I am going to talk about press cars. Press cars are cars that journalists like me get to review. So we write reviews with them, or we film video reviews, or we review them on Instagram or whatever. And everyone is always asking me, how does that work? How do press cars work? So today I'm going to tell you. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Porsche Cayman S, which sold for around $49,000, this wonderful Shelby GT350, which also brought around $49,000, and this Porsche Cayenne GTS with a manual transmission and a V8, which sold for around $52,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with daily auctions and great selection and free listings. Check it out at carsandbids.com. Okay, so press cars. Here is the basic deal. If you've ever wondered how journalists get cars to review, the answer is they are provided almost always by the automakers. They are for use by the press, and so they are called press cars. Now, there's two main ways that the press can get you a press car. One is that you can get them locally, so like at your house, and the other is that you can go on press trips. And today I'm going to explain both. So we'll start with the local press cars, which is how, by the way, I get the vast majority of the cars that I review. And obviously the vast majority of press cars as well. The way this works is, amazingly, there are entire businesses where the only thing that they do is bring press cars to journalists and influencers and various other people for other things. Dignitaries, important people, whatever. There are entire auto shows, entire companies devoted just for this task, to bringing cars to people. This is an actual business, and there's not just one of them. In Southern California, there are 3. And all over the country, there are many others. This is an entire business. So what happens is this. The automaker wants to send me a car. They contact the press car company, which manages the press fleet for that brand. Basically, the press car company actually holds all the cars. So say you're Lexus. Your entire Lexus inventory, your UXs and your RXs, they're just sitting in a warehouse at the press car company's warehouse. And the press car company also has, let's say, Audi's cars. There's a Q5 and a Q7. All of the brand's cars are sitting in this one big warehouse owned by the press car company. And when the automaker wants the press car company to do something with the press car, they call it the press car company and they say, hey, can you go bring a Q7 to Doug DeMuro? And so that's what they do. The press car company is there. They're told by the automaker to bring me a car. They drive the car to my house. They fill it up with gas. They make sure it's nice and clean. They set the XM radio to some relaxing song, almost always, and then they drop the car off. Now, I get 2 major questions whenever I explain that this is how this works to people. And the 2 questions are as follows. Number 1, how do you get access to these cars? And number 2, what happens after the guy drops off the car? And that's they're both good questions. But the second one is especially good. The answer to the question, what happens to the guy, is it depends on the press car company. So some of the press car companies will send a guy behind the first guy in another press car. So like if they're dropping me off a Lexus LX, they will ride behind him in like a Nissan Frontier. They drop off the LX, they both get in the Frontier, and then they drive off. Other press car companies will send the guy with a folding scooter. I swear this is true. They use a folding scooter. I live near a train station, and they will send the guy with the folding scooter. He'll drop off the car, and then he'll ride the scooter to the train station and then take the train back up to where the press car company is located. And by the way, here in Southern California, the press car company is like in northern Orange County, if you know the area. So that kind of puts them right in between LA and like Orange County and San Diego. It gives them access to all 3 areas, and they're constantly bringing cars to those places. So that's like exactly the place to be. They're right off the freeway in that spot. So that's how the press car guy drops off the cars. That's how he gets out of here. Now the other question is probably a more interesting one, which is, how do you do this? How do you get access to these cars? And the answer is, frankly, a lot of work in the industry. Now, it's actually really annoying. This is an annoying answer, and it's annoying for a lot of young journalists to hear this answer because the general feeling is you can't really do car reviews until you have access to press cars, but you can't get access to press cars until you do car reviews. And so it's this weird sort of circuitous situation that doesn't really make it easy for people. But that's just the reality. And a lot of people, what they do is they started a magazine or some sort of publication online that gets them press car access, and then they build up enough of a reputation, they get freelance clients, and then they leave the publication, but they still have the press cars. That's the usual way that it happens. But for someone like me, obviously a little different. I didn't start at a magazine or any publication, really, but my YouTube following was large enough that automakers just started realizing, hey, we should start sending this guy cars. And initially I would reach out and ask them, like, hey, can I get one of these? And now it's more like a, hey, this car's out, or do you want it? Are you ready for it? That kind of thing. But that's kind of the way it's done. It's sort of, you build up a following, you build up a name, you build up a client base if you're a freelance writer, and then you have access to cars, and then you can start reviewing them, writing about them, that sort of thing. So basically the automakers give the press cars out kind of once you have an audience. Now, one other question people ask me is, what are you allowed to do with press cars? What can you do with them? Interestingly, most journalists just use them as their normal cars. Most journalists get a new press car every single week, and they just use that press car to kind of go about their lives and their routines and their day-to-day errands. In fact, I know quite a few automotive journalists who do not own a personal car. I'm serious. Automotive journalists, people writing about cars, the car industry, what car should you buy, do not own a personal car. I know many people in this situation. Which I personally find to be ridiculous and abhorrent and insane, but there are car journalists who do that because they just are so heavily reliant on press cars, which makes you start to wonder about, you know, relationships with automakers. If they lost their press car privileges because they said negative things, then they don't have a car, so maybe that makes them less likely to say negative things. But we don't need to go into all that in this video. Now me, I do not do this. I often do not have a press car at my house, and sometimes I'll have 3. It's based entirely on what I want to review. So if there's something new that I want to film a video with, I will go and get that press car, have them deliver the press car, and then I will film the review, and then it goes back. I will not like just have revolving press cars for no reason, cars that I don't plan to review just because I want something I can drive that week. I think that's insane, and I don't participate, but I do get the cars when there's something that I want to talk about with them. So what are you allowed to do with press cars? The answer is, I mean, review them, basically. Sometimes automakers will deliver a press car with a few interesting stipulations. Occasionally there's a mileage limit. Some automakers, especially the high-end ones, Aston Martin, Ferrari, etc., they'll give you a mileage limit. You can't go over this mileage. You know, they don't want journalists to put too many miles on. I live near Mexico. Most of the automakers say you can't go into Mexico for insurance purposes, obviously. Often the automakers will say, look, you can have this car, but you can't do a comparison test unless you tell us first. You can't do a drag race unless you tell us first. I've always found that unusual. You know, if you really believe in the car's abilities, just let them do the drag race. But I think there's some insurance stuff with the racing. The comparison tests are interesting. Like, automakers want to know who they're being compared against before they supply a car. And I don't do a lot of comparisons, so it's not usually an issue for me, but automakers do have some sensitivity around this, and sometimes will tell journalists no, they don't want to give them a car if it means that they're going to be maybe compared negatively, which is interesting to keep in mind. Now, one thing I want to mention in terms of my relationship with press cars is I used to not use press cars almost at all. I used to use dealerships for a lot of the cars that I filmed videos with. Because I don't love the concept of the automaker gives you this free thing and then you have to write about it. You know, as opposed to the dealerships where if they don't like what you say, you can go to another dealership and another dealership, it doesn't really matter. But there were 2 things that really changed my opinion of this. Number 1 was COVID. My wife and I were pregnant during COVID. My wife was pregnant, and there were some concerns about COVID and pregnancy. We really didn't want to get COVID. And so going to car dealerships and spending hours filming in a car dealership during the heart of COVID was not really something I wanted to pursue. And that's when I kind of started to shore up my relationships with the automakers and start having the press cars come here instead. It was just safer. And at the end of it, it just kind of made more sense to continue doing that. And now you can get the cars quicker that way generally. The other thing that really changed my mind was Matt Farah, actually, the Smoking Tire. He told me, look, he said, press cars, you get a week with the press car usually. They drop it off your house, they pick it up a week later. He said the difference between a week with the car and a day, like at a dealership, is just huge. You can run errands, you can go to places that you normally drive, and so you can kind of compare it against other cars in your mind, like, oh, this is how that drove over here, this is how this drives. You can go on roads that you know are bumpy, whatever. And so you can kind of have a feeling of ownership of the car. You can really feel how it works, how it drives, that sort of thing. And I agree now. I understand the benefit of having a car for a week, and there's no really other easy way to do that other than having the automakers come and deliver the cars. It is a little bit of a gift that the automaker is giving you, a free car, but for a week. But I have a lot of cars that I really love. I don't need that free car. But it does help me provide a more thorough review. Also, it's important to point out that I think at this point, my audience size and the views I get on my videos, it's enough that I'm not really swayed by an automaker like giving me a free car for a week. That doesn't mean all that much to me. I can publish a bad review, and I do sometimes, and the automaker will still probably want to give me cars just because of my audience size. Whereas smaller journalists, I'm not sure if they're able to kind of maintain the same level of objectivity as they more need the cars for their audience. Which, by the way, brings me to the other way to get press cars, which is press trips. Press trips are organized by the automakers to try to get entire groups of journalists to review their car all at once. If you've ever wondered why your favorite car has just been reviewed by 5 people on the same day, it's because they were all on the same press trip, and they agreed to an embargo, which basically means they agreed not to publish their review until everybody had a chance with the car. Because they don't want to, press trips take place over a period of 2 weeks. They don't want to give a preference to someone who happened to be in the first week. Everybody kind of goes for the different waves throughout the 2 weeks, and then they all publish on the same day once the trip is over. Now, press trips really annoy me. Like really annoy me, because what automakers do is, and generally journalists who review cars aren't making that much money. What automakers do is they take advantage of that fact and the fact that people generally like nice things, and they will fly journalists at the automaker's expense to some exotic location and have them do some exotic events to go along with this objective review, and then they put them in a nice hotel and they buy them expensive meals and they have them do these fun things, and then at the end of the press trip they say, okay, we've done all that, now go home and write your objective car review. And it's just not realistic. It's not rational. I was once on a press trip where I stayed in the same hotel where Anne Hathaway got married, free of charge, put up by the automaker. I was once on a press trip where I went on a literal African safari. In Africa. The automaker flew me to Africa and then took me on a safari, not in the automaker's car, by the way. It was just on a regular safari unrelated to the car that I was reviewing. But there I was reviewing the car, but there was a day trip to a safari because they knew that would make us happy and more likely to write a positive review. I saw elephants on this trip. I had nothing to do with the car. I was once on a press trip where I got to go behind the scenes in a castle. I've got a million of these. There are millions of these perks. And then the automaker really, oh, we've taken you in this special thing. Now go write the objective review. Obviously, it is ridiculous, and it's not going to lead to an actual objective review. So a few years ago, I stopped participating in press trips. I still go on the trips because that's the easiest way to get advance access to a car. Like I was just in Phoenix for the Cadillac Escalade V, the Ford Bronco Raptor, the new Mustang in Detroit. I still go on the trips, but the difference is I now pay my own way. And I am right now the only journalist who is paying his own way on press trips. So I buy my own flights, I pay for my own rental car, I pay for my own meals, I pay for my own hotel, which is never, by the way, the hotel that the automaker is putting the journalists up at, because that's $1,000 a night. Usually I'm staying in a Hampton Inn 3 highway exits away because I think that that is the objectively ethical thing to do. And the others in the industry don't, to be totally honest. Now, I know that this is probably kind of annoying to the automakers. Like, oh, Doug is not really doing the trip. He's just going to show up and review the car. He's not going to go to the dinners. He's not going to go to the... But I don't care. Yes, it's maybe annoying because I'm not going through the schedule, but I just think the automaker buying all that stuff for journalists and asking for an objective review is just not, it's not reasonable. I view all that stuff as kind of buying off journalists, and I don't want to be involved. So I don't go on as many press trips as I could because I'm paying. So in fact, the new Chevy Corvette Z06 trip is happening right now in Pittsburgh for some reason. And I skipped it because I just went to Detroit for the Mustang, and it's time away, but it's also money, and I got to kind of decide what I can do. But I think that's the right way to do it. Not taking these gifts from the automakers essentially, but they could potentially cloud your objectivity. So That's my take. The question you might have is, how do you get invited to these press trips? It's sort of similar thing as the press cars, usually through work that you already did. Press trips are a little easier to access. If you work for a magazine, you will be eventually asked to go on a press trip. Because what happens is the older people who work for the magazines and have been for years, they get tired of them. They don't want to go to every week to a new press trip. And so they start sending out the younger people, just go here, write about the car, whatever. And so that happens. But that's another one of those things where you can't really be successful until you go on the trips, and you can't really go on the trips until you're successful. And so the easy way to go and start it is through a magazine or some other publication that, you know, online, video series, whatever it is. But there you go. That is press cars and press trips. That's how it works. If you've ever wondered how the press car situation works, that is an explanation of it. And the next time you see me, you know, reviewing a car with manufacturer plates, then you'll know the story of the press car.